The explosions did not stop. They came in waves, first in the southern outskirts, then closer, then deep into central Beirut. For years, this city lived under the shadow of escalation. But what happened on March 18th felt different. Not a single strike, not a symbolic response. This was systematic, coordinated, and expanding. At least 12 people were reported killed in the early wave of attacks. But the number alone does not explain the shift, because some of those strikes did not land in traditional conflict zones. They hit areas many believed were no longer part of the battlefield. And that raises a question that changes everything. Why did these strikes reach deeper than before? Because what we are seeing is not just retaliation, it is strategy. And that strategy is designed to break something much bigger than a single militia. But to understand what changed that night, you need to understand what Israel was actually targeting, and why Beirut is no longer off limits. This escalation did not come out of nowhere. For months, tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border had been building. Hezbollah, backed and armed by Iran, had increased pressure through rocket fire, surveillance activity, and coordinated regional signaling. But behind the scenes, something more critical was unfolding: a multi-front conflict. Israel was not only responding to immediate threats, it was preparing for a wider confrontation with Iran's regional network. And Hezbollah is one of its most powerful arms. That is why the focus shifted south of the Litani River. This area is not random. It has long been a key operational zone for Hezbollah. A place where missile launchers, storage facilities, and command nodes are believed to be positioned, often embedded within civilian infrastructure. For years, this created a dilemma. Striking these locations risked escalation. Not striking them allowed the threat to grow. Now that calculation appears to have changed, the Israeli military issued evacuation warnings before several strikes. That alone signals intent. This was not a single-time operation. It was a campaign. And the targets were not symbolic. They were part of a network built for one purpose: sustained missile warfare. Hezbollah arsenal is not small. Analysts have long estimated that it includes tens of thousands of rockets and missiles. These range from short-range artillery rockets to more advanced guided systems capable of reaching deep into Israeli territory. But the real concern is not just quantity, it is structure. Hezbollah operates using a distributed model. Weapons are stored across multiple sites. Launch platforms are mobile. Command and control is layered and decentralized. This makes the system resilient and hard to destroy in a single strike. So instead of one decisive blow, what you see are waves, each wave targeting a different part of the network: storage, launchers, communications, logistics, piece by piece. But here is where it becomes more complex. Because striking deeper into Beirut suggests that some of these nodes are not just in the south. They are embedded within central areas. And that changes the rules. So how are these strikes actually carried out? Israel relies heavily on precision air power. Fighter aircraft, likely including advanced platforms such as the F-35, operate alongside surveillance drones and intelligence systems. The systems feed real-time targeting data. The key advantage here is precision. Modern guided munitions can strike specific buildings, floors, or even rooms. This reduces the need for wide area bombardment and allows for targeted elimination of infrastructure. But precision does not mean simplicity. Targets like Hezbollah positions are often concealed, hidden within dense urban environments, protected by deception, movement, and redundancy. To overcome this, strikes are often synchronized. Multiple targets hit in rapid succession. This overwhelms the ability to relocate assets or respond, and that is exactly what witnesses described. Not a single explosion, but sequences, timed, layered, relentless, but speed and precision are only part of the equation. The real challenge is intelligence, finding the target, confirming it, and striking it before it moves. This requires constant surveillance, signals intelligence, human sources, and pattern analysis. Because in a network like Hezbollah, nothing stays still for long. Missile launchers can be relocated, command posts can shift, supplies can be hidden, so the timing of each strike becomes critical. Too early and the target is not there. Too late and it is gone. That is why these operations often appear sudden. But in reality, they are built on weeks, sometimes months of tracking. Now here is the part most people miss. This is not just about Lebanon, it is about Iran. Hezbollah is not an isolated actor. It is part of a broader regional strategy, a network that includes multiple groups across different countries, each capable of applying pressure from a different direction. For Israel, that creates a strategic problem, fighting on multiple fronts at once. So one way to reduce that pressure is to weaken the network itself, disrupt the nodes, break the links, limit the ability to coordinate. And that is exactly what these strikes aim to do. But there is a cost. Every strike increases the risk of escalation. Every expansion of the target area raises the stakes. And hitting central Beirut sends a message that goes far beyond tactical objectives. It signals that no area is completely safe if it is tied to military infrastructure. That message is meant to deter, but it can also provoke. And that is where the situation becomes unpredictable, because the next move does not depend on one side alone. It depends on how Hezbollah responds, and more importantly, how far Iran is willing to go. But even with all this precision, even with advanced aircraft and intelligence, there's one critical limitation that could shape what happens next, and it has nothing to do with accuracy. It has everything to do with time. The most dangerous limitation in this conflict is not firepower, it is time. Because in modern warfare, the side that acts faster does not just strike first. It shapes the battlefield before the other side can react, and right now, that race is accelerating. What happened in Beirut is part of a much larger pattern. Strikes are no longer isolated responses. They are happening in cycles, rapid, repeated, expanding in scope. In just a matter of hours, multiple buildings in central Beirut were hit, some near sensitive government areas. That is not random targeting. That is tempo, and tempo creates pressure. Because Hezbollah is not a static force. It is constantly moving assets, relocating launchers, shifting command posts, rebuilding supply routes. So the only way to disrupt that system is to move faster than it can adapt, and that is exactly what these strike waves are designed to do. But here is the problem. Speed creates its own risks. The faster operations move, the less time there is for verification, less time for political coordination, less time for de-escalation, and that is where mistakes become more likely. Because not every target is clear. Not every location is purely military. And in dense urban environments like Beirut, the margin for error becomes extremely small. Recent strikes have already hit central neighborhoods, with at least 12 people reported killed and dozens injured. And each of these incidents carries consequences far beyond the immediate damage. Because perception matters, narrative matters. And in a conflict like this, both sides are fighting not just on the battlefield, but in the information space. Now shift the focus slightly. Look south. The Litani River. This is where the strategy becomes even more visible. Israeli forces have begun targeting bridges and infrastructure in that region, not just weapons, not just fighters, but movement itself. According to reports, multiple bridges were destroyed to cut off Hezbollah supply routes into southern Lebanon. This is a classic military tactic. Isolation. If you cannot eliminate every launcher, you limit its ability to receive fuel, ammunition, and instructions. You break the chain. And once that chain is broken, the system begins to weaken. But that also signals something more serious. Preparation. Because isolating a battlefield is often the first step before a larger operation, possibly even a ground incursion, and there are already signs pointing in that direction. Israeli forces have reportedly been preparing for a prolonged campaign aimed at dismantling Hezbollah missile capabilities near the border. That changes the timeline completely. This is no longer about days. It could stretch into weeks, maybe longer. Meanwhile, Hezbollah is not standing still. Data shows dozens of attack waves being launched in a single day, using rockets, drones, and anti-tank systems. That volume matters, because even if most are intercepted or fall short, the sheer number forces constant defensive readiness. It drains resources, it creates pressure on air defense systems, and it keeps the northern front active. This is where the real strain begins to show. Israel is not dealing with a single threat. It is managing multiple fronts at once. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran directly, other regional actors watching closely. And each front demands attention, resources, time. So every strike in Beirut is not just about destroying a target, it is about managing a broader equation. How much force to use, where to use it, and how long it can be sustained. Because there is a limit. Air campaigns require constant intelligence, logistics, and coordination. Aircraft need maintenance, munitions need replenishment, pilots need rest. And as operations expand, those demands increase. At the same time, the risk of escalation grows. Iran has already signaled retaliation after high-level assassinations and strikes on its leadership, missiles, drones, regional pressure. This is no longer contained, it is interconnected. And that brings us back to Beirut. Why strike central areas? Why expand the battlefield? Because from a strategic perspective, this is about forcing a decision. Either Hezbollah reduces its operational footprint, or the cost of maintaining that network becomes too high. But that approach carries uncertainty, because pressure does not always lead to retreat. Sometimes it leads to escalation. So now we are at a turning point. On one side, a campaign designed to dismantle a complex and deeply embedded network. On the other, a force built specifically to survive that kind of pressure. Distributed, adaptable, resilient, and backed by a regional power. The question is no longer whether strikes will continue. They will. The question is how far this expands. Will it remain an air campaign? Will it turn into a ground operation? Or will it trigger a wider regional confrontation? Because every strike, every response, every escalation is moving the situation closer to that edge. And this is the reality of modern warfare. It is no longer defined by a single battlefield. It is a network versus network, speed versus adaptation, precision versus resilience. And in that kind of conflict, there are no quick endings, only phases, each more dangerous than the last.